Promoting transformative changes that allow poverty and inequality to be eradicated in the long term is the founding element of Oxfam's mission. Individuals and communities who experience poverty, injustice, exclusion, and crises are at the heart of Oxfam's work. Taking care of communities and individuals means supporting them economically and/or with basic goods such as water, food, equipment, but also training and technical assistance. First and foremost, however, it means amplifying the voice communities and individuals have, putting them in a position to reclaim their needs and their rights, as well as to participate in the definition of policies and programs that respond to those needs. Caring for communities therefore means activating and/or strengthening the links between the different actors that make it up. Paying particular attention to the most vulnerable groups, such as women's organizations, social entrepreneurs, LGBTQI+ people, and creating spaces for their participation in the definition of policies and programs at a local level. It is for this reason that a community and multi-stakeholder approach characterizes much of our work across the world and in programs aimed at strengthening women's organizations or social entrepreneurship, for example, as well as programs which respond to and prevent humanitarian crises. Increasing the focus on the commitment to the community and its local dimension is, in our view, also one of the ways to contribute to the effective achievement of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Being treated equally and enjoying the same rights no matter your sex or gender is a fundamental human right. However, according to last year's World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap, gender parity is not recovering. It will take another 132 years to close the global gender gap. As crises are compounding, women's workforce achievements are suffering, as is gender parity. IGA's latest Gender Equality Index paints a similar disheartening picture, with only a 0.6-point score increase a year. Results have shown that specific groups of people who tend to be more vulnerable situations during times of crises are most at risk, where intersectional gendered inequalities intensify the issue. This means that on top of being mistreated because of your gender, you are also discriminated against because of your ethnicity, sexual orientation, race, disability, income, and occupation, for example. As a result, we now have an even wider gender and racial gap. Women and girls are the most exposed to the effects of the climate crisis. Women are at the forefront of addressing climate change, doing care work, managing resources, acting as community leaders. Climate change places a greater burden on women and girls to meet family needs, often exposing them to gender-based violence and conflict. Despite bearing very little responsibility as contributing to climate-damaging emissions, women in rural communities in the so-called Global South suffer the greatest consequences. For example, while Central America emits only 0.5% of greenhouse gases, women living in the so-called dry corridor, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and El Salvador, are increasingly affected by poverty, hunger, and social violence, which have worsened in recent years, also due to climate change. In addition, Indigenous and other human rights activists are at risk of violence in their work to defend traditional territories, their communities and ecosystems, which are increasingly threatened by changing climates and the pressure of mining and agribusinesses. According to the Generation Equality Forum 2021, only 3% of funds for environmental projects go to support women activists. Women's livelihoods are highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change, which is driving many women below the poverty line and worsening food insecurity. In 2020, it was estimated by the World Food Programme in America that almost 60% of the people suffering from hunger were women and girls, and since then, the gender gap has only increased. Let us recall once again one of Oxfam's core principles. There cannot be economic, climate, environmental, and social justice without gender and generational justice. If policies do not have a gender approach, programs will risk ignoring the root causes of inequality and unwittingly exacerbate existing inequalities. The Canadian government's commitments go in this direction, as its climate change ambassador, Patricia Fuller, illustrates when she says, as part of the doubling of its climate finance commitment, $5.3 billion over 5 years, Canada will implement a target to fund 80% of projects that aim for gender equality. If we want to win the fight against climate change, we need women participating in climate action. Women, girls, and LGBTQI+ people have their own voices, competencies, and dreams. Nevertheless, they face major barriers to get their voices heard, have access to fundamental rights, equal opportunities in education, jobs, leadership positions, and to be free from different forms of violence. Worldwide, women make up the majority of those living in poverty. For this reason, improvements in legislation and policies to protect their equal rights are fundamental to ensure a structural change in society and their full protection from violence and discrimination. In addition, transforming gender and power relations, patriarchal norms, and values that underpin them through education and campaigning is critical to ending poverty and challenging inequalities. Supporting women, girls, and LGBTQI+ people taking control and taking collective action is one of the most important drivers of sustained improvements for all people's rights and is a powerful force to end poverty for all. Oxfam campaigns and works with communities, policymakers, the corporate sector, and many others for a future free from all types of discrimination, be it age, race, religion, or other. We believe in a future where all people can realize their full rights and where policies and practices protect equal rights, especially for those who suffer discrimination, where all forms of violence are eliminated and protection is offered during and after shocks and crises, when the risk of discrimination, exploitation, and abuse are heightened. In order to achieve this change, we all need to think about and put into practice our collective responsibility. As the UN's Sustainable Development Goals tells us, if we want to achieve the 17 goals of sustainable development and leave no one behind, we all have a role to play, and that includes companies who should be held accountable by other relevant stakeholders, such as CSOs and local authorities, which respectively advocate for and implement effective public policies. Today, the private sector, as well as its customers, are much more conscious of how the world works. We are more informed and tend to ask for a fairer and more sustainable world, where inequalities diminish and justice prevails for all.